Hello everyone, welcome to Mammoth Interactive's introduction to the Unity engine. And in this video, in this course, we're going to understand how this engine works. Okay, so we start by looking at the editor, so we see all the windows available, all the features that we have in here, and later in the other videos, we're going to see feature by feature. Okay, we're going to look at 3D models, okay, simple shapes like cubes and spheres. We're going to understand how to navigate in this scene here. We're going to understand how to change color, how to apply transparency, how to use particle effects, lighting. So there are 6 to 7 features that we're going to learn about, but we're going to look one by one very calmly to understand how they work. And then later work on our own games, our own projects. So if you want, later you can evolve to something that can be published to the stores, like the App Store or the Google Play Store, for example. If you don't own Unity yet, you just have to go to the unity3d.com webpage. Okay, it's a very nice page. You're going to see a few videos playing here, and you're going to see a few features. There are lots of interesting content in here that is nice for you to take a look later. But if you just want to download, you have to press this button here, Get Unity Now. And once you click here, you're going to be taken to another page where there are going to be some options. Okay, so we have the personal version, but we also have Plus, Pro, and Enterprise. But don't worry, you don't have to pay right now. The personal version is completely free, and you can even publish your games to the store. There are a few restrictions that it's important for you to learn more about by clicking in this Learn More link, but you just have to click on the Download Now button. And once you are in this page, you just press Download Installer. So you're going to download a helper file, this Unity Download Assistant. Once we double click it, we're going to open another folder. If you are on macOS, and you just have to open this app file here, or if you are on Windows, it's just going straight to the installer. Okay, so again, we just press the open button, and we're going to see a few instructions here for the installation. You just press continue. There are some terms of service that is important for you to read. Then you press continue again. Let's agree if that's the case, and you're going to see the options here to download Unity. Okay, it's important to have these three first selected, so the actual editor, documentation, and standard assets. And if you want to have build support for Android or iOS or any other platform, it is important for you to come here and activate all the things that you want to use. Okay, this is very important. If not, if you don't want to install now, that's okay, but later to add support you would have to install these extra files in here. Okay, and after you're done with this, you should be able to open the Unity editor. Alright, so in the next video we're going to open the editor, start a new project, and well, start taking a look on the available tools in here. I hope you're excited to start this, and I'll see you soon. Hello there, welcome back. Now that we have Unity open, we have to create a new project so we can start understanding this tool a bit better. To make a new project, we go to the top right and press the New button. And now we have a few settings to adjust here. First of all, we need to set the project name. So let's name this Exploring Unity. The location of this project is going to be in a projects folder that I created under my home folder. And why did I do this? It's very common for newcomers to any game engine to just drop their projects in the documents or desktop or downloads folder. This is not very good. It is better to have a folder just for your project so you can easily find them anywhere you want. Okay, so we have Exploring Unity as the project name, and the location is going to be projects. We're going to leave the 3D rendering mode enabled, and after that we're going to click Create Project. So after we do this, Unity is going to create a folder with the same name of your project name in your projects folder. Okay, it's going to be there. You can access through your operating system, either it is a Mac OS or Windows or Linux, and you can just find the files of your project there. And now the editor has opened. So if this is your first time working with a 3D game engine, it might seem a bit complicated in the beginning, okay, since this is the first time you're looking, but actually it makes pretty much sense, okay? Let's take a look on each of these windows and tabs available here one by one. So in the top left, you have a hierarchy window. Okay, this is going to work more or less like you have in your operating system. So for example, if you go to your pictures folder, you're going to see several other folders there for events that you went. So for example, a birthday party or if you made a trip to a nice beach, or if you went to a party in a nightclub. There are going to be several folders, and inside of these folders you're going to see different files that are going to be your pictures. That's pretty much how a hierarchy is going to work in Unity. Okay, we're going to have a list of files inside this hierarchy, and each of them are going to have their own hierarchy if you want. Okay, and these items that we see here, in this case we have main camera and we have directional light, they are called game objects. Okay, this name is very important, game object. It is the base entity for making a game in Unity. So you're going to have a game object for the camera that is going to render the game for the player. You're going to have a game object for the player. You're going to have a game object for enemies, for explosion effects, for a river, for whatever you can imagine that is going to change how your game is working, either visually or internally. It needs to be in a game object. That's pretty much how it works here. However, there is a problem, not a problem, kind of a characteristic of the hierarchy window. You can't see anything there, okay? Imagine you have a 3D cube, you would only see the name cube. So the hierarchy is basically just text, okay? And of course, configuring the hierarchy of the objects, okay? If you have a parent object that contains several children objects, that's pretty much everything you need. But what if we want to see what we have in this hierarchy? Okay, and this is the best thing of using a game engine, not just any programming language, but a game engine. Unity has a scene window. Okay, so this is kind of the gates for us to see the virtual world we are building. Okay, notice that we have a plane in here. We can see some gray guides, and the good thing about this is that if you right click in this scene window, notice that your mouse icon turns into an eye and a few buttons. And while you're holding the right mouse button, you can just look anywhere you want. Okay, left, right, top, bottom. It's like we have our own camera. Okay, so we as the developers are able to take a look on the entire level in here by just right clicking and looking around. Okay, so we can even examine the skybox that we have here. There's the sun up there. Okay, there are these two icons in here. And while we are in this mode, we can press the W, A, S, and D keys to navigate around, okay, which is great. If you have ever used first-person shooter games, if you have ever played them, then this should be familiar to you, okay? You just change where you're looking and press the W, A, S, D keys to strafe around. And you can even use Q and E to move down and up. And with these controls, you can reach pretty much anywhere in this scene. So if you're building a city, for example, this is going to be very useful. Okay, so you're going to go to places where the player is going to be, so you're going to see if the lighting seems okay, if the models, they have the right size, and if you have to reposition something, you can just use this window. Okay, it's very, very useful. And it's interesting to practice movement in this scene. Okay, just so you get used to the controls and you can work faster. Okay, so the things that we have in the hierarchy are also here in the scene. If you click on the main camera, you notice that some arrows appear in the main camera. And if you click on the directional light, you're going to see that the directional light is selected. But we're going to see more details on this soon enough. Okay, so remember, I told you this is a camera. Okay, we have a developer camera in here. But to be honest, there are two cameras in this scene. Okay, there's the one for the developer, which the player is not going to see, only us, when we are making the games, are able to see. But we also have another camera in here. Okay, you're going to see that there's this little icon for the camera. This is the main camera. And notice that this project that we made already added a camera to this scene. And it did this because this is what the players are going to use, so they're able to see things. Okay, this camera here is going to render the game for the player. It's going to draw the game for the player. So they are able to see, well, basically the entire game. So we have this camera here. If you take a close look, you're going to see that there's a little rectangle in front of it. Okay, that's the view frustum. It's like the area that is used for the camera to look at places. And there are these little rectangles in here that are these lines in here that are going to kind of show the range that the camera is reaching, and it's going to draw. And while you have this camera selected, you can see that there's a little box in the bottom right of the scene window. This is the camera preview. Okay, and this is basically what the players are going to see. This is the actual real deal. Okay, you can see a quick preview of the game here, but if you want to see more details, you can just go to the game window. Right now we can only see the horizon, we can see the blue sky and a ground in here, but once we develop the game and add some 3D elements and add actual movement logic, we're going to see the actual game running here. Okay? And okay, so at the right portion of the editor, there is the inspector window. Okay, so what is this about? What does this window do? It shows details of whatever we have selected. It can be a game object that is in our scene, or it can be a file that is in our project. Let's check a game object first. If we click on the main camera and we look at the inspector window, you notice that it's now filled with lots of details in here. Okay, at the top you're going to see the name of the game object. Okay, so remember, before everything, this is a game object that is called main camera. We have a tag that pretty much, it's like a text, it's like a little label that is telling that this is a main camera, okay, but it depends on the usage. Sometimes we don't use tags, sometimes we use tags. It depends on the game. You're going to see throughout this course that we are going to use these from time to time. We have layers, so we can use these to check for collisions, but it's not used for the camera. And if you look below these items that we're looking right now, there's going to be a list of other items. Okay, so we have transform, camera, GUI layer, flare layer, and audio listener. These items, they are called components. Okay, and this is very important. Okay, game object is something that is very important. It's the base entity for the game, but components are also essential for making a game because they are what change how game objects behave. Okay, so if we make an empty game object that just says main camera, well, that's not enough. We need to specifically tell Unity that we want this camera to behave like a camera, and that's why we have a camera component. Okay, this one. And we also have a transform component. Let's take a look on this one first. Okay, this is the most basic component for every game object you can imagine because it deals with the position, the rotation, and the scale of whatever game object you have. Okay, this is very basic for positioning in Unity, and we're going to see more about this shortly. Okay, we also have a camera component, and this component is going to show us details about the camera. So for example, right now the clear flags for the camera is skybox. Okay, so it renders like this. But if we wanted to use a flat color, we can just click on skybox and select solid color, so it becomes entirely blue. And if you want to change the color of the solid color, you can just click on this blue rectangle and use the color picker to choose whatever color you want. Okay, but that's not what we're going to do here. But you see, a lot about Unity is experimenting. We can just get here and change some values and see the immediate effect in the game. Okay, sometimes we don't even have to recompile the code if we're writing some code. Okay, it's not necessary at all because we can just change these things, and through script, Unity is going to process these changes and then change how the game is looking like. Okay, you can even change the field of view of the camera, so it's going to have a small rectangle or a large one. Okay, in general, we don't have to change the default values for the camera, but still it's good to know that these things are here. And for the directional light, we're going to see other things. We also have a transform component, but we this time have a light component. So this light works as a directional light, but we can change them to spotlight or point light or area light later if we want. Okay, we can change the light's color, we can change the intensity, how the shadows are going to be rendered. So these are better seen once you have some 3D elements in the game and you can see how the shading is working for them. Okay, and we also, in the bottom of the Unity editor, we have a project window. This window contains the assets folder, which is very important because this is going to contain all the files that are going to be used to make the game to happen. Okay, so any 3D models that we're going to use, any scripts that we create, any materials and animations and sound and video, every file that you can imagine that can be used for making this game to work well is going to be in the assets folder. Okay, that's why we have this one here. And another window that is very important and is the console window. If this isn't enabled here, you can just go to window and you can go to console and press this button. So if you're a developer, you should be familiar with this, but if you have never seen that, this window is basically used for showing messages to the player. Okay, and there are three kinds of messages that we can see here. We have error messages, which are colored in red. We have warning messages, which are yellow, and we have basic information messages, which are white or black. Okay, and the error messages are, as the name suggests, when you make any mistakes in your code, or maybe some plugin is not working right. Well, it's kind of the biggest message that Unity can show you to tell that something is wrong. Okay, so you're going to see an error. You have warnings when there are some suggestions to improve your code, or there's something that is not optimized and you can change that. And the log messages, the informational messages, are basically to show information for you as a developer. Okay, you can even make your own messages in here, so you can see what's happening in the game to see if it's behaving correctly, or if you're going to see some errors while you're developing the game. Well, you can use these informational messages to see what's happening behind the scenes. Okay, so that's pretty much it for the Unity editor. Okay, we have seen the hierarchy window that lists items, the game objects in the game. We have the scene window that we can navigate in here and see everything that we have. We have the game window that shows what's going to be rendered for the player. Inspector that shows details, so we see the name of the game object, some components. We have the project window with the assets folder for the files, and we also have console. And this is pretty much it for the Unity editor. In the next lesson, let's take a look, a deeper look on positioning of elements. As we saw in the previous lesson, there's a component there is nearly in all game objects of Unity, and that component is called transform. So there are three things we can deal with the transform. We can deal with position, rotation, and also scale. So let's take a look on here. Notice that if you select a camera, let's also double click and zoom with the mouse wheel to check the main camera closer. If we change any of these values that we see here on X, Y, and Z, this icon is going to move. You can change the value on X by either just typing a number in here, like 1, or 2, or 3, and the camera is going to slowly move. Or you can also click on the label X, or Y, or Z, and move the camera around. Okay, so what is this telling us? Notice that when we use X, we are moving the camera. So we are moving this game object in 1 degree of freedom, in one axis. And this axis is called the horizontal axis, which is this red arrow here. You can even click on this arrow and move the camera around so you can fine-tune the position for this camera, okay? And this is very good for visual editing. So if you have buildings, if you have cars, if you have some trees in this game, you can just use this arrow to move the camera horizontally, okay? And if you notice here at this gizmo in the top right of the scene window, there's a little hint that this is the x-axis, the horizontal one. So it's the red arrow. Okay. Now, if we go to Y and change that, you notice that the camera is moving up and down. This is the vertical axis. Okay, so right now we've tested 2 degrees of freedom, the horizontal and the vertical axis, which is basically allowing us to put the camera in a 2D environment. However, for 3D elements, for 3D games, we have a 3rd degree, okay? That's why it's 3D, we have 3 dimensions. And this 3rd degree is the Z-axis, which is the depth axis, okay? Sometimes in other engines, this Z and Y are swapped, okay? So Z would be the vertical axis and Y would be the depth axis. But for Unity, X and Y are horizontal and vertical, and Z is the actual one that gives depth, okay, which I personally think is better. It makes more sense. Okay, so Z is used for moving in this axis of freedom here, and it is the blue arrow. Okay, and well, with these 3 numbers, we can position this game object in whatever we want. Now, what if we want to deal with 2 axes at the same time? Okay, we can see that these arrows that we see here in the scene window can be clicked and dragged. Okay, so we can move on X, Y, X, Z, and Y. But if you look closer here, there are 3 cubes in this camera. Okay, if you click on the green camera, if you click on the green cube, you can move the camera in the XZ plane. Okay, so horizontal and depth. This color here is directly opposite to the axis that, well, it's coming out of it. Okay, so if you use this green one, you move on blue and red. If you use the red cube, you move on green and blue, and if you use the blue cube, you move on green and red. So this is very good for positioning things in a plane. So imagine we had a plane in here, and we had a building, for example, and we had to reposition that building. Instead of trying to manually selecting these numbers, we can just click on the green cube and position this building around the scene, for example. We're going to practice this shortly. Okay, so this is pretty much it for position. We also have rotation, and it works more or less the same way. We have 3 degrees of movement here, X, Y, and Z. And well, if we change X, notice that we are using the camera to look up or down. And you can immediately see how this rotation is changing by looking at these gray lines that come out of the camera, or by looking at the camera preview. Okay, you can use both to see how this is impacting. If we use Y, we make the camera rotate in the vertical axis. Okay, so we are able to look to the left or to the right, for example, like this. Okay, and if we go to Z, it's going to make the camera rotate sideways. Okay, so you can, well, it's like you're tilting your head to the left or to the right. But there's another way to change the rotation. Okay, so right now we have these arrows that change the position. However, if you go to the top left of Unity, there are a few tools available for you here. Okay, so the second one that is pre-selected by default is the moving tool. Okay, so we can, well, do all this movement. The first one is basically for moving our developer camera. Okay, so we can look at other places, but well, if we use the right mouse button, we can just navigate around much better. But still, it's good to know that this exists. Now, if we click on the third camera, notice that the tools around this main camera are different. Okay, so we have a red circle, a green circle, and a blue circle. And if we click and drag them around, well, we can rotate the camera on all of these 3 axes. And it works the same way. Red is for X, green is for Y, and blue is for Z. Okay, so you can just click and move around, so we're able to fine-tune the camera to look to whatever position we want, okay, in whatever manner we want. And if you click on this sphere around the camera, you're able to freely rotate this, but in general it's not very useful. It's a bit difficult to rotate the camera like this. It's better to just select some degrees and well, calmly choose the better values that you want. Okay, and the third element is the scale. Okay, so scale is basically changing the size of things. We have X, Y, and Z. However, if we change the scale in the camera on X, Y, and Z, notice that absolutely nothing seems to happen. Okay, the scale is not changing. The camera is not getting any bigger. You have to remember that this camera that we see here, this little icon is, well, it's not inside the game. This is just a representation, a tip that help us to click on the camera and select the camera and know where the camera is. Same goes for light, but they are abstract. Okay, they are not a 3D model. They're not an actual camera model that a player is going to see that there's a camera following them. That's not how it works. Okay, so to deal with scale, we have to deal with a 3D element. Okay, so how do we make a 3D element? We need to make what we call a 3D primitive. If we want complex 3D elements, it's better to design them in other tools like 3D Max, Maya, or Blender, and then you import to Unity, because Unity is not a 3D modeling and texturing tool. Okay, it's a game making tool. But sometimes we can use some primitive shapes to, well, we can prototype the game without needing to have the final art, which is good. So if you prototype your entire game with simple shapes like cubes, spheres, cylinders, and cones, you're able to do 2 things. You can program your game, so you're not waiting on anything to be ready, and you can also adjust the game design of your game, so you can find the difficulty that you want. Okay, you can find the experience that you want to pass to the players. So how do we make a 3D element? If we go to our hierarchy and then we right click here, you're going to see there is a new menu. So we have copy, paste, duplicate, delete, but down here we have several other options. We can create some nice game objects in here. We can create an empty game object, which is going to be, well, it's just going to have a transform component. Okay, so let's go ahead. If you click on create empty, there's going to be game object, and it just contains transform. That's not what we want. Now, if you take a look, there are some other menus here. We have 2D, 3D object, 2D object, light, audio, UI, particle system, and camera. We're going to 3D object, and you're going to see that there are some familiar names in here. We have cube, sphere, capsule, cylinder, and we also have plane. Okay. To start, let's click on cube, okay, which is the most basic shape. So we have a cube element in the hierarchy. Okay, we have the cube game object. And if you go to the inspector, you notice that there are lots of components in this cube. Let's take a look at them one by one. Okay, so first of all, the one that we are basically, this is basically everything we're talking about in this lesson, is the transform component. So we have the position, and it's set to an odd number. If we want to move this cube to the center of the scene, we can just change x to 0, y to 0, and z to 0. So the cube is right here. Okay, this is the origin of our scene. It's the middle of our scene. And we also, just like the camera, we have rotation. If we change rotation on x, the cube flips to these sides. Okay, and we also have scale, and this is where scale is going to make things interesting. If we change scale on x, the cube is going to increase its size in the horizontal axis. Okay, so we can use a large number for x to make it bigger, or we can use a small number, even smaller than 1, to make it look shorter, like this. We could even use a negative number to flip it horizontally, but well, there's no difference for this cube. We can do the same thing vertically to make the cube taller or shorter, and in the depth axis as well. Okay, so we can use all of these 3 degrees, 3 axes, 3 dimensions to change the scale and then change the size of the cube. But if we want to do this visually, we can use a tool for that. We can just go to this resizing tool. And you notice that if we are in the moving tool, we have some arrows. But if you go to this scaling tool, you're going to see some cubes, okay, which is a little tip that it means we're going to resize whatever we have selected. We're going to change the scale. If you use red, it changes horizontally, green vertically, and blue in the depth axis. And if you use this middle cube here, and this is very good, you can scale on 3 axes at the same time. And this is very good to keep proportion. Okay, so if we made a cube like this one, for example, and we want to keep the proportion between the scale, okay, all of these properties here, we can just use this blue cube, and we're going to change them to change everything properly. Okay, it's like, remember when you used to draw in Paint, for example, and you just resized an image, but you made the image look a bit flat, okay, a bit weird. That's pretty much the solution to that. Okay, if you work on 3 degrees at the same time for scaling, you are going to preserve proportion, which is going to make the game look prettier that way. Okay. And this cube game object contains several components inside it. So we have the cube mesh filter. Okay, so this is basically the data for the 3D object that is being rendered here, a 3D mesh. We have a box collider, which is used for basically processing collisions. So if we activate physics later, this is going to be used. And we also have a mesh render. Okay, now this component is very important because notice that if we disable it, the cube is completely invisible now. But if we keep it enabled, well, we can see the cube again. Okay, so this basically draws the cube. Let's talk about this in more details in the next lesson.